The taste of metal flooded my mouth as Richard's words hit me like physical blows. Good luck finding someone who wants damaged goods. The courtroom was emptying around us, his expensive lawyer already packing briefcases, while mine shuffled papers with the defeated look of someone who'd been outmaneuvered at every turn. My hands trembled as I stared at the settlement papers. Everything I'd helped build during 10 years of marriage, now legally his. The prenup document felt like sandpaper between my fingers. I could hear Richard's mother in the hallway, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Well, that's what happens when gold diggers marry above their station. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as the bailiff waited for me to collect my single cardboard box of personal belongings. 6 weeks later, the divorce was finalized, and Richard had already moved on with his secretary while I struggled to afford basic groceries. My name is Sophia, I'm 32, and I'm an architect who forgot how to build her own life. This is the story of how I remembered. 3 months later, I was elbow deep in a dumpster behind a foreclosed mansion in Redmond, Washington, when my world shifted on its axis. A woman in a designer suit approached while I held a broken chair leg, my hands black with grime from salvaging furniture to survive. "Excuse me, are you Sophia Hartfield?" I looked down at myself. Filthy jeans, ripped sweatshirt, the smell of desperation clinging to my clothes. Depends who's asking. She smiled, extending a business card with elegant lettering. "Victoria Chen, attorney. You've just inherited $47 million. The chair leg slipped from my fingers, clattering against the dumpster's metal walls. 47 million. The number bounced around my skull like a pinball, while Richard's voice echoed, "Nobody's gonna want a broke homeless woman like you." Victoria gestured toward a black Mercedes parked at the curb. "Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere more comfortable?" I stared at her manicured nails, her pressed suit, her polished shoes that probably cost more than my monthly storage unit rent. I'm not exactly Mercedes ready. "You're the sole heir to a $50 million estate. The car can handle dust." After collecting my scattered belongings from around the dumpster, I followed Victoria to her car. As we drove through Seattle traffic, Victoria handed me a leather folder. "Your Uncle Theodore left you his Manhattan residence, his Ferrari collection, investment properties across 3 states, and controlling share of Hartfield Architecture. The firm alone is worth approximately $47 million. I flipped through photographs of the brownstone I'd seen featured in Architectural Digest, 5 stories of Victorian elegance mixed with modern innovation in the West Village. My breath caught as I recognized the building from my childhood dreams, before Richard convinced me that dreaming was selfish. "There has to be a mistake," I whispered. "He disowned me 10 years ago." Victoria's expression softened as she navigated through downtown traffic. "Mr. Hartfield never removed you from his will. You were always his sole beneficiary. However, there is one condition." My stomach plummeted. "What condition?" She met my eyes in the rearview mirror. "You must take over as CEO of Hartfield Architecture within 30 days and maintain the position for at least 1 year. If you refuse or fail, everything goes to the American Institute of Architects." I laughed, a bitter sound that surprised us both. I haven't worked a single day as an architect. I graduated at 21, married at 22. My husband thought my education was a cute hobby, like flower arranging or pottery. "Mr. Hartfield hoped you'd eventually return to architecture. This is his way of giving you that chance and ensuring you take it." I looked at the folder again, at photos of the life I'd abandoned for a man who'd ultimately thrown me away like garbage. The architecture studio, the drafting tables, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city where dreams were built in steel and glass. "I'll do it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "When do we leave?" The Manhattan brownstone stole my breath. Margaret, Uncle Theodore's housekeeper, stood at the door, silver-haired and warm, her face creasing into a smile that carried decades of kindness. "Miss Sophia," her voice broke slightly, "I took care of you after your parents passed. You were 15 and so heartbroken, wandering these halls like a lost ghost. Welcome home, dear girl." Memory hit like lightning. This woman making grilled cheese sandwiches at midnight when grief kept me awake. finding me crying in Theodore's study after the funeral, her gentle hands braiding my hair before school each morning. "Your uncle never stopped hoping you'd come back," Margaret said, leading me upstairs. "He had the 5th floor converted into a studio for you 8 years ago." I stopped walking. 8 years ago? But we weren't speaking. Margaret's smile turned sad. "Mr. Theodore never stopped believing you'd come home eventually. He said talent like yours doesn't stay buried forever. It just waits for the right moment to break through the surface." The 5th floor was an architect's paradise. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the village, massive drafting tables caught afternoon light, expensive computer equipment hummed quietly in the corner. Drawers were stocked with pristine supplies, T-squares, mechanical pencils, specialized markers I'd dreamed of owning as a student. On the main wall, my college exhibition sketch was pinned to a bulletin board. The Sustainable Community Center that had won first place my senior year, the design that had made Theodore so proud before I threw it all away for Richard's approval. The edges were yellowed now, but the lines remained sharp and bold. He'd kept it for over a decade. I touched the paper gently, tears blurring the precise measurements I'd calculated by hand. Theodore had believed in me even when I'd stopped believing in myself. The first board meeting was exactly as hostile as I'd expected. 8 senior partners sat around a polished conference table, examining me like a contamination that needed removal. Carmichael, a man in his 50s with the confident posture of someone who'd never been challenged, leaned back in his leather chair. "With all due respect, Miss Hartfield has 0 industry experience." This decision suggests Theodore wasn't thinking clearly in his final months. I'd prepared for this moment during 3 sleepless nights, reviewing every architecture journal I'd hidden from Richard. Every sketch I'd drawn in secret, I pulled out one of 17 notebooks I'd filled during my marriage. Designs created in stolen moments when Richard traveled for work. "Actually, Mr. Carmichael," my uncle was thinking perfectly clearly. He knew this firm needed fresh vision, not the same old guard clinging to past glory while the industry evolves around them. I slid the notebook across the polished table. "This is a sustainable mixed-use development I designed 3 years ago, while my husband attended a conference in Chicago. Rain gardens, green roofs, parametric facade design, passive solar optimization." Carmichael flipped through it, his expression carefully neutral, but other board members leaned in with genuine interest. Patricia, the only other woman in the room, spoke up. "Even if your designs show promise, running a firm requires business acumen, client relationships, project management experience. You lack practical application." I nodded, meeting her skepticism directly. "You're absolutely right. Which is why I'll rely heavily on the existing team, particularly Jacob Sterling." I looked at the senior partner who'd been quietly observing. "I'm not here to pretend I know everything. I'm here to learn, to lead when appropriate, and to honor my uncle's legacy while bringing new perspectives." I stood, planting my palms on the table. If you can't handle working for someone who wants to push forward instead of maintaining comfortable mediocrity, you're welcome to leave. But if you stay, we're going to build something extraordinary together. My first major test arrived 2 weeks later, the Anderson Project, a cutting-edge Seattle headquarters for a tech billionaire who wanted sustainable innovation, exactly what Hartfield architecture was renowned for. I'd spent 3 weeks collaborating with our engineers on the design, a building that would breathe with the environment, collecting rainwater, optimizing light with smart glass, its living roof supporting native species. Later that morning, as I returned to my office to prepare for the Anderson presentation, I discovered my laptop missing from my locked desk. Carmichael appeared in the doorway holding it with theatrical concern. "Found this in the break room. Someone must have moved it by mistake." I opened the laptop and felt my world tilt. The presentation file was corrupted, slides jumbled, images missing, carefully crafted renderings replaced with error messages I had 15 minutes before Anderson and his team arrived. 2 choices: panic and postpone, admitting defeat, or do what Theodore would have done. "Actually," I said, closing the laptop with a smile that surprised me with its confidence, "let's do this differently. Mr. Anderson, you said you wanted a building that tells a story. Let me tell you that story." I moved to the whiteboard and started sketching, my hand moving with muscle memory built over 10 years of secret practice. I drew the building's silhouette first, then began layering details as I spoke. Traditional architecture treats buildings as static objects, I said, using colored markers Jacob quietly handed me. But your headquarters will be dynamic alive. The smart glass responds to seasonal changes, darkening automatically in summer to reduce cooling costs by 40%, opening in winter to maximize passive solar heating. By the time I finished 45 minutes later, the whiteboard was covered with a comprehensive visualization of my vision, raw, honest, clearly born from genuine passion rather than polished presentation software. Anderson stood, examining the board with growing excitement. This is exactly what I wanted, someone who understands buildings as living systems, not just impressive structures. When can you start? After they left, having agreed to terms immediately, Jacob was grinning. That was extraordinary, but someone corrupted your files deliberately. This was sabotage. I nodded. I know, it doesn't matter. Carmichael wanted me to fail publicly. Instead, I showed everyone that the work speaks for itself. It doesn't need fancy presentations to be compelling. The next evening, I called all board members to an emergency meeting at the firm's main conference room, with Victoria as legal counsel present. Our IT department had conducted a thorough forensic analysis, tracing the file modifications through network logs and access timestamps directly to Carmichael's computer login credentials. By morning, he'd resigned with barely concealed fury, muttering about nepotism and incompetence as we bought out his 30% stake at fair market value. But the real treasure came when Margaret found a leather-bound journal hidden behind Theodore's architecture books. "Your uncle kept a diary," she said softly. "Many entries are about you." The journal spanned 15 years, from when I first came to live with him through the week before his death. Theodore had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 18 months before he died, but had chosen to keep it private while making arrangements for my eventual return. One entry stopped my heart. March 15th, 10 years ago. Sophia married Richard Foster today. I refuse to attend. Margaret says I'm being stubborn and cruel. Maybe I am, but I can't watch someone I raised walk voluntarily into a cage. All I can do now is wait and hope she finds her way back to herself. Another entry, dated 8 years earlier, started building the studio on the 5th floor today. Margaret thinks I'm foolish, preparing a space for someone who might never come home, but I need to believe she will. The studio is my act of faith, proof that I never stopped believing in her talent or her strength. The final entry, written 8 weeks before his death. The cancer is moving faster than expected. Pain is considerable, but I'm strangely content. Victoria has instructions to find Sophia after I'm gone. The rest is up to her. She'll either rise to meet this challenge or find her own path forward. Either way, she'll finally be free to become who she was always meant to be. 6 months into my leadership, I launched the Hartfield Fellowship, selecting 12 students from 300 applications, offering $45,000 annual stipends, plus housing vouchers for emerging architects from underrepresented backgrounds. Emma Rodriguez was 22, designing homeless shelters with integrated community gardens. My family didn't understand why I wanted to study architecture instead of nursing, she told me nervously on her first day. I smiled, recognizing the familiar pain. Let me guess. They said it was a nice hobby but not a practical career? She nodded, eyes brightening with recognition. People who don't understand passion will always try to diminish it, I said. My ex-husband spent 10 years telling me my degree was a cute waste of time. Don't let anyone make you small for dreaming big. By November, Emma's community shelter design had attracted attention from a Brooklyn nonprofit. They wanted Hartfield to lead the project with Emma as primary designer under supervision. 18 months after climbing out of that dumpster, Marcus Chen, CEO of a rival firm, made an unexpected acquisition offer. $300 million for complete ownership of Hartfield architecture. The board gathered in the conference room, Patricia presenting the terms with barely contained excitement. Given your 51% ownership, the final decision is yours, Sophia. I didn't hesitate. No, Theodore didn't leave me this company so I could sell it to someone who represents everything he fought against. Profit over innovation, shortcuts over craftsmanship. Patricia smiled. That's exactly what we hoped you'd say. Theodore included a provision in his will. If you rejected any substantial acquisition offer within the first 2 years, you'd receive an additional trust fund he'd established $30 million, unrestricted, for understanding that some legacies can't be bought. She handed me a velvet box containing a simple ring, a thin band with architectural blueprints etched into the metal. The accompanying note read, "Sophia, this ring belonged to your great-aunt Eleanor, who practiced architecture in the 1950s when women were actively discouraged from the profession. She faced barriers you can't imagine, but she never compromised her vision. Build bravely, live boldly, and never let anyone convince you that you're not enough. I'm proud of who you've become." During those 18 months of rebuilding the firm, Jacob and I had grown closer through countless late nights collaborating on projects, shared excitement over successful presentations, and quiet moments when he'd listened patiently as I processed the transformation of my life. That evening after the board celebration, Jacob found me in the studio, staring out at the village lights below. He'd been my strongest supporter from day one, the partner who saw my potential before I rediscovered it myself. He pulled out a small box and opened it, revealing a ring that caught the lamplight. "Sophia Hartfield, I'm not asking because of any timeline or test. I'm asking because every day with you is better than the day before, and I want a lifetime of watching you change the world. Will you marry me?" I looked at the ring, then at Jacob, then at the studio Theodore had built 8 years ago, hoping against hope that I'd eventually find my way home. "Yes," I said through tears that felt like relief. "Absolutely yes." The wedding happened in Theodore's rooftop garden, Patricia walking me down the aisle since the man who'd raised me was gone. Jacob's vows were simple and perfect. "Sophia, you taught me that true partnership means celebrating each other's strengths, not competing with them. I promise to always see you clearly, challenge you lovingly, and believe you're capable of anything you set your mind to accomplish." My vows were harder to deliver without breaking down completely. "Jacob, 18 months ago, I was convinced nobody would want me, that I was broken beyond repair. You didn't just prove that wrong, you helped me understand I was never broken at all. I was just waiting to find someone who saw my cracks as places where light could enter and make me stronger. We used the $30 million trust to launch a nationwide public architecture initiative. Libraries, community centers, public spaces designed with the same care usually reserved for luxury projects. Emma led the design team for the Philadelphia Community Library, her first project as lead architect. 5 years after taking over Hartfield, I returned to my alma mater to give the commencement address. When I graduated from this program, I had a degree, a dream, an absolute certainty about my future. I told the sea of eager faces. Within a year, I'd abandoned all 3 for a man who needed me to be small so he could feel large for 10 years. I disappeared into a life that wasn't mine, convinced I'd lost myself permanently. I paused, looking out at young architects ready to change the world. But here's what I learned. You can't actually lose yourself. You can misplace yourself temporarily, get confused about your worth, let others define your potential. But your essential self remains, waiting patiently for you to remember who you are and what you're capable of building. That evening, I stood in Theodore's rooftop garden where this chapter of my story had truly begun. Jacob was in the studio below working on sketches for a Detroit children's museum. Margaret was preparing dinner, humming the same song she'd hummed when I was 15 and broken. I looked out at the city stretched before me, full of buildings designed by people who'd dared to dream in steel and glass, who'd believed their visions deserved to exist in the world. I thought about the woman who'd climbed out of that dumpster, believing she'd lost everything that mattered. If I could speak to her now, I'd tell her the most important thing she was already, everything she needed to be. She just needed time, space, and the courage to remember it. Your worth isn't determined by who wants you or who throws you away. It's determined by what you build, in steel, in stone, in the life you design for yourself when you finally remember that you are both the architect and the foundation. If this story moved you, if you've ever felt invisible or discarded, share your own rebuilding story in the comments. Because transformation isn't a one-time event. It's a daily choice to construct yourself stronger than before. You're not broken. You're not too much or not enough. You're exactly who you need to be, waiting for the right moment to remember your own power. Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, you need to try audiobooks. I've got an exclusive deal with Audible. Your first month is completely free. That's access to over 500,000 titles, zero cost to you. All the details are waiting in the description. Don't miss this one.